When a seemingly routine traffic stop spirals into a moment that could shape an entire career, a police officer's darkest assumptions crash headfirst into a truth he never anticipated. His target? A man who unknowingly holds the key to his future. The sun was slipping low over Sacramento, casting the streets in warm ribbons of gold and burning amber. Eric Porter was heading home, the weight of a long day still clinging to him. The soft hum of his sedan was a comfort as he reached for the air conditioning, trying to shake off the residual tension from the office. A mellow tune drifted from the radio, a gentle balm against the noise of city life. As he neared a yellow light, he eased off the gas, coasting to a stop just as it turned red, only to be jolted by flashing blue and red lights in his rearview mirror, followed by the piercing wail of a siren. His brows drew together, concern flickering in his eyes as he steered to the curb. Rolling down the window with a quiet sigh, the patrol car pulled up behind him, and out stepped Officer Bradley Larson, a man in his mid-30s, buzz cut sharp, badge glinting in the amber glow. With practiced swagger, Larson adjusted his utility belt and approached Eric's car like he owned the sidewalk. "License and registration," he barked, his tone firm, emotionless, but with an edge that cut just enough. Eric didn't argue. He reached slowly and calmly into the glove box, retrieved the papers, and handed them over with a composed nod. Yet he felt the intensity of Larson's stare, the way it picked him apart, looking for fault. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Larson asked, leaning into the window, his breath barely brushing the threshold of civility. "I'm not entirely sure," Eric responded, steady but polite, voice wrapped in calm steel. "You didn't come to a complete stop at that light," Larson said, though his words faltered slightly, like he wasn't convinced of them himself. Eric's brow furrowed. He nodded slightly. "I see. I thought I slowed in time, but if not, I understand." Larson didn't move right away. He lingered, gaze narrowing, body language shifting in subtle but unmistakable ways. This was no longer a matter of traffic law, it had morphed into something else. He looked down at the license in his hand. "You're not local, are you?" There was the briefest pause before Eric replied, "I moved here a few months ago. The address is up to date." But Larson wasn't truly listening anymore. His tone sharpened, his questions edged with something darker, something probing for more than a driving violation. "Where were you headed in such a rush?" "Just home," Eric replied evenly, unwavering. But the air between them thickened with unspoken suspicion. Larson wasn't just seeing a well-dressed man in a sedan anymore, he was seeing something else entirely. Eric could feel the unspoken tension ratcheting up, but he didn't flinch. What Larson mistook for passivity was something much more dangerous: control. Larson stepped back slowly, folding the documents with a theatrical calm, then slipped them into his pocket with a smug flick of the wrist. His posture straightened, face hardening with quiet judgment. "Step out of the car for me," he ordered. Eric's grip on the steering wheel tightened for a split second, though his face remained a mask of calm. "Is there a particular reason, officer?" His voice was cool, level. Larson's lips curled briefly, but the smirk vanished. "I asked you to step out. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." The veiled threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Eric exhaled through his nose, then opened the door and stepped out. Larson's gaze scanned him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored suit that hinted at order and precision. But none of that seemed to register. "Hands where I can see them," Larson said, gesturing toward the front of the car. Eric complied, every movement deliberate, measured. "Is there something in particular you're looking for?" Larson's mouth twitched with a faint smirk. "Just a routine check. We've had some incidents lately, can't be too cautious." Eric turned slightly, locking eyes with him. "Incidents involving men in suits driving home from work, or are we talking about something else here?" The question hit hard. Larson's composure wavered. His hand inched toward his belt, more instinct than intent. "Watch your tone!" he snapped. "I'm simply asking for clarity," Eric replied, his voice a quiet blend of restraint and resolve. It unsettled Larson. "You seem to know a lot about this process," he muttered, eyes narrowing. "Got something to hide?" Eric let the silence breathe before responding. "No, officer. I just value transparency, especially in encounters like this." Larson scoffed but offered no answer. He stepped away, circling slowly, trying to reassert control of the situation. but the balance was shifting. Eric's unwavering presence, his calm precision, was something Larson couldn't categorize. No panic, no fidgeting, just a quiet power that made him uneasy. "You're awful sure of yourself," Larson murmured almost under his breath. "Like you already know how this ends." Eric didn't bite. He tilted his head. "It's not about confidence, officer. It's about mutual respect," Larson stiffened. Whatever smugness remained evaporated, replaced by something defensive and raw. He opened his mouth, then stopped, words stuck in the tension. As silence stretched, it felt like wires were tightening between them, too taut to ignore. Larson was beginning to understand this wouldn't go the way he thought it would. But instead of retreating, he pushed harder. He tapped his fingers against his holster, the frustration radiating off him in waves. This man, this calm, poised stranger, was challenging him without raising his voice. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," Larson ordered, his voice clipped and sharp. "I need to check for weapons." Eric raised an eyebrow, incredulous. "Weapons?" His tone was still smooth, but now it carried a chill. "Do I look like someone armed and dangerous?" Larson's jaw clenched. "I'm not going to ask again." Eric hesitated. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Then wordlessly, he turned and placed his hands flat on the hood. The sound of boots crunching on asphalt filled the silence as Larson approached. His pat-down was brisk, harsh, his hands lingering, the search more personal than professional. This wasn't about safety anymore. It was about control. It was a power play. A thinly veiled attempt to provoke a response. But Eric remained still. No flinch, no stiffness, not even a twitch under the officer's invasive search. "You're clean," Larson muttered. Stepping back, his voice tight with frustration, as though the absence of guilt was somehow an inconvenience. And Eric turned, meeting his eyes with a calm sharpness, replying coolly, "Of course I am." "Now, officer, if you're finished—" "I'm not done," Larson snapped, his voice rising, the words spilling out with a desperation that betrayed his slipping grasp on control. "You seem to know an awful lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why?" Eric folded his arms, his posture loose but grounded, exuding an unshakable composure as tension hung heavy in the air. "I've had plenty of interactions with law enforcement," he said, voice even but edged with history. "Let's just say, I've learned more than I ever wanted to." Larson's eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring. "That's so. You a lawyer or something?" Eric's lips lifted in a faint, unreadable smile. "Or something." The ambiguity clearly irked Larson, who stepped closer, deliberately invading Eric's space, his voice dropping into a near growl. "You think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this?" But Eric didn't blink. He held Larson's gaze with quiet fire. "I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness. And so far, I'm not seeing much of that here." The words dropped like a gauntlet, and Larson couldn't resist, sneering. "Fairness? You think this is about fairness? People like you always—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. The half-swallowed phrase hung between them like smoke from a just-doused fire. Eric's face didn't change, but his posture did, just enough to signal that he'd heard exactly what Larson hadn't said. "People like me?" Eric repeated softly, every word weighted with restrained fury. Larson recoiled, suddenly aware he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "You know what I meant," he muttered, though his voice lacked the edge it had before. "I think I do," Eric replied, calm, no longer passive but razor-edged, slicing through the air with surgical precision. "And I think we both know this stopped being about a stoplight a long time ago." Larson opened his mouth, but words failed him. His confidence flickered, his certainty fraying, the ground beneath him no longer solid. Then Eric spoke, voice firm and level. "Officer, I think it's time you knew who I am." Larson's brows tightened, irritation returning like a reflex. "I don't care who you are," he spat, but the slight crack in his tone said otherwise. Eric slowly reached into his pocket, deliberate, controlled. "I'm reaching for my badge," he said calmly, watching Larson's hand twitch near his weapon. "No dramatics, I want you to see it." The tension tightened like a wire as Eric pulled out his leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a polished badge that shimmered in the fading light. "Eric Porter," he said, voice casual but potent, "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." Larson froze, eyes darting from badge to face, scanning for some sign of deception, but found only authority and a quiet, crushing disappointment. "Internal Affairs?" he echoed, his voice cracking under the pressure of recognition. Yes, Eric said, cutting him off. I oversee officer conduct. My job is making sure the badge means something. Larson paled, his arrogance unraveling before Eric's unrelenting stare, and instinctively stepped back, his hand slipping from his belt as if its weight had become too much. Eric stepped forward, reclaiming space Larson had just surrendered. Do you know what the most disturbing part of this has been, Officer Larson? He asked, voice slicing through the silence. Larson remained mute, looking like a man who'd realized he was in deep and sinking fast. It's not the profiling, though that's shameful. Not the needless escalation either. It's that you did all of this without even knowing who you were speaking to. You assumed I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't understand the laws you swore to uphold. And why? Larson tried to speak, but the words caught. Eric answered for him. Because I didn't fit your idea of who deserves respect. The sentence wasn't angry, but it carried the weight of every injustice Eric had witnessed and endured, and it landed like judgment. That's not just a problem for me. That's a problem for everyone you meet in uniform. Larson's shoulders slumped as the full truth settled on him, and he glanced at the badge again as if hoping it might vanish. Eric stepped back, giving him room, but his voice remained sharp. Here's how this is going to go. You're going to step back, return my documents, and think very carefully about what comes out of your mouth next. Larson faltered, caught in the tension between pride and fear. Then Eric added, voice low and final, You'll be hearing from me again, not as a driver, but as the man who decides whether or not you're fit to wear that badge. Larson swallowed hard, color draining from his face, and reached into his chest pocket with trembling hands, returning Eric's license and registration without a word. Eric accepted them silently, tucked them into his wallet, and stepped toward his car. Just before he opened the door, he turned one last time. Remember this, Officer Larson. The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone. As Eric slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, Larson stood frozen in the twilight, his confidence shattered, his future uncertain. But for Eric, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The ride home was quiet, but Eric's thoughts roared. Not because this was a rare event, but because it wasn't. Larson wasn't the first. And Eric knew, with crushing certainty, he wouldn't be the last. But now he had the power to change things. The next morning, Eric sat behind his desk at Internal Affairs, sunlight slanting through the blinds as a file lay open before him. Bradley Larson, with a history of minor complaints, unchecked conduct, and administrative shrugs. Eric leaned back, fingers steepled, realizing that Larson wasn't an outlier. He was a symptom of a deeper illness. And Eric wasn't here to patch wounds. He was here to treat the cause. A knock pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant Linda entered, files in hand. Morning, Mr. Porter. Got the misconduct summaries, and Chief Daniels wanted to remind you about next week's review. Eric nodded, taking the documents. Thanks, Linda. Also schedule a meeting with the chief this afternoon. There's something I need to talk to him about. She paused, reading the weight behind his words. Of course, she said, and slipped out. Eric looked down at Larson's file again, not with vengeance, but with resolve. This wasn't about punishing one man. It was about transforming a culture that gave him permission to act the way he had. Culture starts at the top. Later that day, Eric sat across from Chief Daniels, a seasoned leader with tired eyes and a no-nonsense edge, and laid it out in blunt terms. I could have let it slide, Eric said. Chalked it up to another bad stop, but that would have been a mistake. Larson isn't an isolated case. He's a warning. Daniels sighed, rubbing his temples. It's not the first time we've heard his name, he admitted, but we've always dealt with it. Quietly. Eric leaned forward, voice steady. And that's the problem. Quiet fixes nothing. Quiet lets it grow. It's time to be loud. Daniels stared back, the weight of change hanging heavy. What are you proposing? A department-wide review, Eric said without hesitation, of training, of protocols, of how we hold ourselves accountable. If we don't demand more from ourselves, why should the public trust us? Daniels folded his hands. You're going to ruffle feathers. Eric nodded. Good. It's about time someone did. What followed was a storm of work, meetings, interviews, data, community forums. Eric poured himself into it, using the Larson encounter not as a headline but as a spark. Change wasn't easy, but it had begun. Larson eventually faced an internal hearing. Eric didn't hide his presence. He sat across from the officer he once stood before, watching as Larson squirmed beneath the weight of real scrutiny. The result was a suspension, but Eric knew the true win wasn't that. It was in preventing the next incident, the next victim, the next headline. Months later, Eric stood at a podium facing a room filled with officers, city leaders, and citizens. His voice rang out not with blame, but with purpose. Justice isn't just catching bad guys. It's making sure those who protect us do so with fairness, respect, and integrity. Applause followed, thunderous and real, but Eric didn't bask in it. Because this wasn't an ending. It was the first chapter of a better story. As he stepped off the stage, scanning a crowd filled with doubt and hope, he knew change wouldn't come in a day, but it would come. And for now, that was enough. If this story resonated, share it. Start the conversation. The ones that matter. The ones that lead to real change.